So the Vision is Gigabyte's little known but most recent creative-centric lineup of motherboards. It's all about the delivery of a stable, efficient, sustained CPU-centric effort and a lot of bandwidth output. Everything else goes in coach. Today we're reviewing the ambitious Z590 VISION G from Gigabyte, a deliciously focused motherboard which exalts engineering at every corner of its beautifully dressed PCB, showing off some of Gigabyte's best engineering talents. And talking of engineering talents, again, I want to thank my mother for all this. Don't act like you're not impressed. So, the so-called creative motherboards are about the most endurant hardware you'll ever find. And these boards do not come cheap. In fact, they are about the most expensive motherboards you can find out there. But Gigabyte, with its new Vision lineup of motherboards, pretends that it can do better and cheaper, showing off some of the most robust components available and even introducing some exotic features. Now, starting with the obvious. We are dealing with a 6-layered PCB ATX motherboard, exactly what you would need for a PCIe 4.0 enabled motherboard in terms of signal isolation and thermal dissipation. So definitely a really good foundation for a creative motherboard. CPU wise, we got an LGA 1200 CPU socket able to support both 10th and 11th generation of Intel Core processors. Note that only the 11th generation of Intel Core processors support and deliver PCIe 4.0 level bandwidth, which has its importance since this is where your motherboard will be sourcing its PCIe 4.0 level bandwidth from. Small reminder, PCIe 4.0 standard delivers twice the bandwidth of its older PCIe 3.0 standard, obviously something which will definitely impact your day-to-day computing performances. VRM-wise, well, this is where the Vision D had to deliver, and deliver it kind of did. We have 1360 amps power stages organized in a 12+1 direct phases configuration. That is 720 amps worth of CPU-centric power, obviously more than you need to operate and even severely overclock any processor available on the Intel Core catalog today. And whilst being definitely a powerhouse, it's also very, very hot VRM. And Gigabyte tried to address that last point with a rather premium 2-stage heat pipe linked heatsinks, one of which is a Finare block to provide more radiating surface. It makes contacts with the power stages with a high quality 1mm thick thermopad, but does fail to provide a secondary contact with its chokes, and a mistake in my opinion, since its competition does provide a double contact design on its VRM, and it does show on the temperatures reading. With a tortured and overclocked 10-core i9 at full synthetic load, the VRM main and side block mostly remain below 75 degrees Celsius, which is more than acceptable given the unlikely load I apply to the CPU. Where I am a bit less happy is a 90 degrees Celsius shown on the chokes. While still being within acceptable range, I find it a little too hot for my taste. To be fair, it did not thermothrottle the processor in any ways, but the add-on of a double contact VRM, as I was talking earlier, would have easily removed 15 to 20 degrees Celsius out of the reading and add a little bit more lifespan to the motherboard. In addition, I am not a big fan of the plastic covering, which I find both useless and counterproductive. By covering almost the entirety of the main block, I can't help myself wondering if it doesn't also trap some of the heat around it and creates a bit of an oven effect. And if not, at the very least, it obstructs the VRM airflow. I would have rather seen an extended metal I/O roof to provide some extra heat dissipation surface, as seen on some of its competitors such as MSI, to name only one. So without staying too much on this topic, the VRM is fine, it does its job, it does extract all the potential of your processor, but there is some room for improvement, and I really hope that Gigabyte will take the opportunity of the next generation of this board to improve its design. Now, memory-wise, the Z590 VISION G supports up to 128GB of DDR4 RAM in a dual-channel configuration, overclockable up to a whopping 5333 MHz. That is 333 MHz more than its predecessor, something which I absolutely appreciate. But keep in mind that in order to reach those maximal clocks, you probably will have to go with a single memory stick. The more you populate your channels, the less the speed can go. Nevertheless, this is the first board where I did venture beyond 4 GHz on a fully populated dual channel, something that creators, which are usually using memory intensive software, will definitely appreciate. So therefore, a very big memory kudos to Gigabyte for this. Now, staying in the memory, this board can support up to 4 M.2 solid-state drive sticks. Depending on which processor you couple this board with, performance and configuration will differ. With a 10th generation PCIe 3 only Intel Core processor, only 3 M.2 solid-state drive will be enabled, swapping data at PCIe 3.0 standard, meaning up to 32 gigabit per second. But couple it with the 11th generation PCIe 4.0 enabled Intel Core processor, and our 4 sticks will be fully enabled. The first 3 sticks can support PCIe 4.0 standard, meaning data swaps up to a whopping 64 gigabit per second, which will allow multiple RAID configuration and extended fast storage. And something I have not seen on any of the motherboards I have reviewed so far, and I did review a few, and also a definite added value on a creative-centric build. Now, obviously, these sticks will go very hot very quickly, and Gigabyte did an amazing job at providing each of these 4 sticks with thick, extended thermopadded heat shields, which brilliantly kept temperature below 40 degrees Celsius during my stress test, far away from any potential thermo-throttling. Now, chipset-wise, we're dealing with a brand new Z590 chipset from Intel. Now, despite being sometimes advertised as a PCIe 4.0 chipset, it really is not. Only your 11th generation of Intel Core processor comes equipped with 20 PCIe 4 lanes. The chipset itself comes with the exact same amount as it was in its predecessor, the Z490, 24 PCIe 3.0 lanes. The only difference is that it can redirect those CPU PCIe 4 lanes to the most bandwidth needing components in your build. Now, is that a bad thing? Well, not necessarily. Since our CPU takes care of all the PCIe 4 lanes, our chipset can remain at a cool 6 watt of heat signature, so no need of an active, expensive chipset cooling solution as seen on the old PCIe 4.0 X570 chipset. But more important than its fake PCIe 4.0 support, it has an upgraded DMI link, which provides a 8 GB per second direct link to the CPU, double the bandwidth than on its previous generations, and a real upgrade, and maybe the most important one on the Z590 powered motherboard, since it will really benefit all of your bandwidth hungry I/O outputs. Now, export wise, we have 3 PCIe expansions, all of which are 16 PCIe slots, but with different speeds. As usual, only the first 16 slot can deliver up to 16 full PCIe lanes, therefore this is where you absolutely have to place your graphic cards for optimal performances, hence the metallic reinforcement. Now, the 2 remaining naked 16 slots have been capped at PCIe 3.0 4 lanes, which is not exactly suited to serve a video card. And again, their PCIe standard will vary depending on what processor you will be using. With a 10th generation core CPU, all of the PCIe exports will run at PCIe 3 standard with 1 GB per second bandwidth per PCIe lane. But couple the board with an 11th generation Intel Core processors, and our first PCIe slot will see its bandwidth double to 2 GB per second per lane. And I can already hear hordes of viewers saying, Laurent, oh sweet, soft-skinned Laurent, but if I have double the bandwidth on my PCIe slot, doesn't it mean that I'm gonna have double the performances on my video card? Oh, sweet child. PCIe 3 or PCIe 4 standard won't make any difference on your graphic card's performances, since none on the market today can output enough bandwidth to bottleneck the PCIe 3 standard. So yeah, great future-proofing feature, but that's about it for now. And I'm not sure I love the fact that this is a single video card motherboard, especially with this price tag, and knowing that it is aiming at the graphic creating community. It just feels a bit short, especially knowing that the previous iteration of this board, the Z490 VISION G, had a dual video card support in an 8x8 PCIe lane configuration. So yeah, definitely something Gigabyte might want to look at for the next iteration of this board, and really, you know, maybe revert to what it used to give. Not less, but more That's the idea. Now let's quickly note the presence of our usual 6 SATA 3.0 ports able to swap data to that slow and bottlenecking 6 gigabit per second. Nothing new here. But more importantly, let's move on to our back I/O, which does feature an integrated backplate, fully expected at this price range. And starting from the left, we have 2 second generation USB plugs, 4 USB third generation with 5 gigabit outputs, a PS2 connector for some low latency gaming, an upgraded HDMI port which can output 4K at 30 frames per second. And that thing right here is not a display output, but a display input. Simply plug it to your video card output and the video signal is redirected to our Type-C right here at DP 1.2 standard or 4K at 60 frames per second. But most importantly, thanks to GIGABYTE VISIOLINK option, it can power and transfer the video signal on a drawing tablet, all in one single cable. Definitely a big plus for professional creators who rely on the drawing tablet out there, and a definite well, creative kudos to GIGABYTE for this. Next, we have 2 USB 3.2 generation with 10 gigabit outputs, 2 3.2 second generation Type-C. Next, we have our 2.5 gigabit LAN, and finally, our 8-channel brand new ALC 4080 codec from Realtek, which in essence sounds and records exactly like its predecessor, the ALC 1220, which is good news since it means a top of the industry codec delivering excellent results both in playing and recording setups. So overall, as seen on other Z590 motherboards, the back I/O has received a severe bandwidth upgrade. There's so much more bandwidth outputs than ever available before, but I really want to underline that VISIOLINK and that tablet support that this motherboard brings, and which really adds value to the Vision G when compared to its natural competition. So definitely a big back I/O kudos to GIGABYTE for this. Now, front panel wise, nothing new here. We have a couple of second generation USB connectors, great for monitoring, one 5 gigabit front panel connector, and a 10 gigabit front panel Type-C, and a Thunderbolt connector, totally normal at this price range, no surprises there. Cooling wise, we have 6 hybrid connectors, meaning that they can all individually support either a PWM fan, a water pump, or even a flow sensor, giving a unique sense of agility to this motherboard, a sense of enthusiasmness, since it will be able to support about any kind of cooling solution, even the most eccentric dual custom water cooling system. So definitely a big, gigantic cooling kudos to GIGABYTE for this one. Troubleshooting wise, we have our usual easy debugger, which will guide us through the main booting stage of, well, our boot. In my view, the bare minimum for a PCIe 4.0 enabled motherboard. And right here, a BIOS button for an easy BIOS update and recovery without the need of a CPU, an absolute must. And talking of BIOS, well, I have to give it to GIGABYTE. It is slick looking, in tune with the overall white spirit of the Vision branding, but most importantly, it is rock stable. Very important on a board which builds its old repute on being durable. I had some issues reading the fonts. Found it a little bit difficult to decrypt, looked a bit like difficult to read for me, but other than that, it is a breeze. Now, GIGABYTE being GIGABYTE, we have more RGB on this board than doubts on a wedding day. Starting with an RGB strip hidden under our I/O roof, which by the way is very hard to pronunciate, and no less than 4 RGB connectors, 2 of which are addressable, though all conveniently placed in pairs at opposite side of the board for an easier and cleaner access. In short, enough RGB to make you younger and better looking. Now, in conclusion, at $280 before taxes, the Z590 Vision G has a $40 premium when compared to its predecessor. And truth be told, if you already own a Z490 motherboard, I would, well, advise against the upgrade, simply because the 11th generation of Intel Core processor does enable PCIe 4.0 bandwidth also on your Z490 motherboard, so you don't really have the incentive of changing your own motherboard every generation. That's a given. But if this is your first build or an upgrade from a much older system, well, The Vision G is a striking motherboard. I really like the white theme and its extension all the way down to its guts and bias. I mean, you can tell this product was carefully branded, which is not always the case, and received a lot of attention, and that is a good sign. As far as engineering goes, I do see room for improvement in its VRM cooling, but nothing which will fundamentally change the fact that this motherboard can safely and durably deliver all your components' full potential, and that's what really matters. I do regret the lack of proper dual GPU support as it was available on its predecessor, but to be absolutely honest, with the current, video card pricing and stock outage, it's virtually impossible to have two video cards anyway, so yeah, we're not gonna miss much there. For sure. But most importantly, the engineering was driven by a constant worry to suit and cater for graphic creators of all sorts and kinds, and it's so well reflected in its bandwidth availability and its minimalist instincts, as the VISIOLINK features shows so well. Well, in short, this is not a value board, this is a tool which goes to the fundamentals of what a creator wants and should expect. A no-nonsense design with a real focus on engineering and an instinctive simplicity in its use. And on those, the Z590 VISION G does not only delivers, it sets a new standard at this price point. And so in short, if you are looking for about the best versatile, heavy computing motherboard money can buy, at least at this price range, well, there's really nowhere else your money wants to be.